The cold bit through Helena Nichols's thin wool coat like 1,000 tiny knives as she stood alone on the wooden platform of the Flagstaff depot, watching the dark shape of her father's wagon disappear into the swirling snow. He had not looked back, not even once, and that hurt worse than the freezing wind that whipped around her ankles and threatened to knock her leather traveling case right off the platform. She was 21 years old, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be truly abandoned. The year was 1883, and winter had come early to northern Arizona territory. Helena pulled her coat tighter and tried to stop the trembling that had nothing to do with the cold. Her father had brought her here with promises of meeting a respectable family who needed a governess, but when they arrived at the depot, he had simply set her case down, pressed a small leather purse into her hands, and told her the truth. There was no position. There was no family. He had gambling debts that required him to leave the territory, and he could not take her with him. He said she was old enough to make her own way now, that she was smart and resourceful, and then he climbed back into his wagon and drove away into the storm. Helena's fingers were going numb as she clutched the purse. Inside were $23 and a note with an address in Seligman, nearly 70 miles southwest. Her father had written that an old friend of her late mother's lived there, a woman named Mrs. Garrett who might take her in. Might. That single word felt like a betrayal all on its own. The depot building was small and drafty, but at least it provided some shelter from the wind. Helena pushed open the door and stepped inside, grateful for even the minimal warmth. A pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated heat, and a gray-haired man in a Western Union uniform looked up from his desk. "Train's not running today, miss," he said, his voice apologetic. "Snow's too heavy on the tracks. Might not run tomorrow either, depending on how this storm goes." Helena's heart sank. "I need to get to Seligman." The telegraph operator shook his head. "Not by train, you will not. Stagecoach might run if the weather clears, but that is not until day after tomorrow at the earliest. You have somewhere to stay?" She did not. The money in her purse would not stretch far if she had to pay for a hotel room for several nights. Helena fought down the panic rising in her chest and forced herself to think clearly. "Is there work in town? Something I could do for room and board?" Before the operator could answer, the door behind her opened, bringing in another gust of frigid air and a tall figure covered in snow. The man stomped his boots on the doormat and pushed back the brim of his hat, revealing a lean face with sharp cheekbones and intense gray eyes. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. Despite the cold, he moved with an easy confidence that suggested he was accustomed to harsh weather and hard living. "Morning, Charlie," he said to the telegraph operator, his voice a low drawl that carried the cadence of someone who had spent his whole life in the West. "Any word from Prescott?" "Nothing yet, Knox," Charlie replied. "Lines might be down. This storm's a bad one." The man called Knox glanced at Helena, and she saw his eyes take in her situation with quick assessment. Her worn coat, the single traveling case at her feet, the way she was standing too close to the stove as if she could not get warm enough. His expression shifted from casual interest to something more focused. "You waiting on the train, miss?" he asked. Helena lifted her chin, trying to maintain some dignity. "I was told it is not running. Not likely to run for a few days," Knox agreed. He studied her for a moment longer, then turned back to Charlie. "She got somewhere to go. Says she needs to get to Seligman," Charlie offered, and Helena felt a flash of annoyance that they were discussing her as if she were not standing right there. "I can manage on my own," she said firmly, even though she had no idea how. Knox's gray eyes met hers, and she saw no pity in them, only a straightforward practicality that was somehow more comforting than sympathy would have been. Seligman's a long way in good weather. In this storm, it is a hard ride even for someone who knows the country. You have people there. Helena hesitated, then decided there was no point in lying. A friend of my mother's, I have her address, but I have never met her. Your family know you are traveling alone. The question was gentle, but it still stung. Helena felt her throat tighten. My father left me here. He had business elsewhere and could not take me with him. Something flickered in Knox's expression, a brief shadow of anger or perhaps recognition. He glanced out the window at the blowing snow, then back at her. You got money for a hotel? Some, Helena admitted. Not much. Knox was quiet for a moment, seeming to turn something over in his mind. Then he said, My name is Knox Garrett. My mother runs a boarding house here in Flagstaff. It is not fancy, but it is clean and warm, and she charges fair rates. I was heading there now. You could come with me, talk to her about staying until the weather clears and you can get south. Helena's first instinct was to refuse. She had been raised to be cautious of strangers, especially men, and everything about this situation felt dangerous and uncertain. But the alternative was wandering around a town she did not know in the middle of a snowstorm, spending money she could not afford to spend, and hoping she did not freeze to death before she found shelter. Why would you help me? She asked bluntly. Knox's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Because you look like you need help, and I was raised to offer it when I can. Also, because no father should leave his daughter alone at a train depot in a snowstorm, and if I can make that even a little bit right, I will. There was something in his voice that told Helena he meant every word. She looked into those steady gray eyes and made her decision. All right, thank you. I would appreciate speaking with your mother. Knox nodded and picked up her traveling case before she could protest. It is not far. Stay close and watch your footing. The snows made everything slick. They stepped out into the storm, and Helena immediately understood what he meant. The wind had picked up even more, driving the snow horizontally across the muddy street. Knox walked beside her, his body blocking the worst of the wind, one hand hovering near her elbow in case she slipped. The buildings of Flagstaff loomed up through the white curtain of snow, their shapes indistinct and ghostly. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and cheerful yellow curtains visible through the front windows. Knox led her up the steps and through the door into a warm, bright entryway that smelled of baking bread and coffee. Helena felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as the warmth enveloped her. A woman emerged from a doorway to the left, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and the same gray eyes as her son. When she saw Helena, her expression immediately shifted to concern. Knox, who is this? Found her at the depot, Ma. Her father left her there, and she is trying to get to Seligman to find a woman named Mrs. Garrett. The older woman's eyebrows rose. Garrett, that is our name. Helena's heart skipped. Do you know a woman who was friends with Elizabeth Nichols? That was my mother's name. She died 5 years ago, but my father said her friend lived in Seligman. Mrs. Garrett's hand went to her throat and her eyes widened. Elizabeth, oh my heavens. Yes, I knew Elizabeth. We grew up together in Missouri before I came west. I am Margaret Garrett, but your mother called me Maggie. She looked Helena up and down, and tears suddenly shimmered in her eyes. You have her face. I can see her in you. Come in, child. Come in out of the cold. Knox, take her things upstairs to the blue room. Before Helena quite knew what was happening, she was being ushered into a warm kitchen and pressed into a chair at a large wooden table. Margaret bustled around, pouring coffee and setting out fresh bread with butter and jam. Knox disappeared with her traveling case, his boots heavy on the stairs overhead. "Tell me everything," Margaret said, sitting down across from Helena. "Start from the beginning." So Helena did. She told Margaret about growing up in Santa Fe, about her mother's death from pneumonia, about how her father had become increasingly distant and distracted afterward. She explained about the gambling debts she had not known existed until this morning, and the way her father had simply left her at the depot with barely an explanation. By the time she finished, her coffee was cold and Margaret's face was set in hard lines. "That man," Margaret said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "has a great deal to answer for. Elizabeth would be heartbroken to know how he has treated you." "He gave me your address in Seligman," Helena said softly. "I did not know there was a Flagstaff connection." "I own property in both places," Margaret explained. "This boarding house and a small ranch outside Seligman. My husband died 3 years ago, and Knox helps me manage both. We spend winters here in Flagstaff and summers in Seligman. The ranch has a foreman who looks after things when we are here." Knox came back into the kitchen, having shed his heavy coat and hat. Without them, Helena could see him more clearly. He was taller than she had first thought, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who did hard physical work. His face was handsome in a rough, unpolished way, with a straight nose and a firm jaw. When he caught her looking, she quickly dropped her gaze to her coffee cup. "Room's ready," Knox said to his mother. "Fire's going, should warm up quick." "Thank you, dear." Margaret turned back to Helena. "You will stay here with us. No arguments. Elizabeth was like a sister to me, and that makes you family. When the weather clears and the roads are passable, we will all go down to Seligman together. I need to check on the ranch anyway." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since her father's wagon had disappeared into the snow. "I do not know how to thank you. I can work for my keep. I am good with figures, and I can read and write well. I can help with cooking and cleaning." "We will figure all that out," Margaret said kindly. "Right now, you need to rest and get warm. Knox, show her back up to her room. Helena, there is hot water in the pitcher if you want to wash up, and extra blankets in the chest. Come down when you are ready and we will have supper." Helena followed Knox back up the stairs, acutely aware of his presence behind her. He showed her to a pleasant room with blue wallpaper and white curtains, a comfortable-looking bed with a thick quilt, and a small fireplace where flames were already crackling. Her traveling case sat at the foot of the bed. "Thank you," Helena said, turning to face him, "for helping me. You did not have to do that." Knox leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. "My mother would have my hide if I had left you at that depot. But I would have brought you here anyway. No one should be alone like that. You'll never be alone again," he added quietly, and something in his voice made Helena's breath catch. The way he was looking at her was not improper, but there was an intensity to it that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced before. "I should let you rest," Knox said, straightening. He tipped his head in a polite nod and left, pulling the door closed behind him. Helena sat down on the edge of the bed, her mind whirling. In the space of a few hours, her entire life had been upended and then somehow righted again. She should have been terrified, alone in a strange house with people she did not know. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months, perhaps years. And there was something about Knox Garrett, with his steady gray eyes and quiet confidence, that made her think her father's abandonment might turn out to be the best thing that had ever happened to her. The storm lasted 3 more days. During that time, Helena settled into the rhythms of the boarding house. Margaret had 6 other guests, all men who worked in the timber industry or for the railroad. Helena helped with cooking and serving meals, cleaning rooms, and managing the household accounts. Margaret was delighted to discover that Helena had a quick mind for figures and neat handwriting, and she turned over the boarding house books to Helena's care almost immediately. Knox came and went, sometimes gone for hours, sometimes sitting by the fire in the evening reading or mending tack. He was quieter than his mother, more reserved, but Helena noticed that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged at unexpected moments. He was also unfailingly considerate, holding doors, carrying heavy items, and making sure the firewood box was always full. The other boarders clearly respected him. When Knox spoke, people listened. Helena found herself increasingly aware of him. The way he moved with an easy, athletic grace. The way his hands were strong and capable, whether he was fixing a broken chair leg or dealing cards for a friendly game of poker with the boarders. The sound of his laugh, rare but warm when it came. She caught herself watching him more than once and had to force her attention back to whatever task she was supposed to be doing. On the third evening, after supper had been cleared away and the other boarders had retired to their rooms or headed out to the town saloons, Helena sat by the fire working on mending one of the kitchen towels. Margaret had gone to bed early with a headache, leaving Helena and Knox alone in the sitting room. Knox was cleaning his rifle, a task he performed with methodical care. Helena watched his hands moving over the metal and wood and finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Why are not you married?" Knox looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Then that almost smile tugged at his mouth. "That is a bold question, Miss Nichols." Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am sorry. I should not have asked. It is none of my business." "I did not say I minded." Knox set down the cloth he had been using and leaned back in his chair. "The answer is I have not found the right woman. This country is hard on people, especially women. I would need someone strong, someone who would not break under the weight of the life out here, someone who could be a true partner, not just a decoration." "You think women are decorations?" Helena asked, hearing the edge in her own voice. "No," Knox said firmly. "I think too many men treat them that way, and I think that is wrong. My mother ran this boarding house and the ranch for 2 years after my father died, before I was old enough to help properly. She is the strongest person I know, man or woman. That is what I would want. Someone with that kind of strength." Helena looked down at the towel in her lap, thinking about her own life. "My father never thought I was strong. He thought I needed to be protected and sheltered, but he was the one who could not handle things when they got difficult." "You are here, are not you?" Knox said quietly. "You did not fall apart when he left you. You found a solution and you kept moving forward. That is strength." Their eyes met across the firelight, and Helena felt something shift in the air between them. It was too soon, she told herself. She had known this man for only 3 days, but there was a connection forming, something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Knox cleared his throat and looked back down at his rifle. "Storm should break tomorrow. Roads will still be rough, but passable in a day or 2 after that. We can head to Seligman by the end of the week if you are still wanting to go." "I do not know what I want anymore," Helena admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be false. I feel like I am starting over from nothing." "Starting over is not the same as having nothing," Knox said. "You have skills, you have your health, and you have people who care about what happens to you now. That is something." Helena smiled despite herself. "When did you become so wise?" "I have my moments." Knox reassembled his rifle with practiced efficiency and stood. "I am heading out to check on the horses. Sleep well, Miss Nichols." "Helena," she said impulsively. "You can call me Helena." Knox's gray eyes warmed. "Helena, then, and you can call me Knox. No need for formality between friends." Friends. Helena turned the word over in her mind after he had gone. Yes, they were becoming friends, but the flutter in her stomach when he smiled at her suggested her feelings were already moving beyond friendship into more dangerous territory. The storm broke the next morning, leaving Flagstaff blanketed in nearly 2 feet of snow. The sun came out, bright and blinding against the white landscape, and the temperature began to rise. By afternoon, the snow was melting rapidly, turning the streets into rivers of mud and slush. Knox spent the day helping clear paths and check on neighbors, making sure everyone had weathered the storm safely. Helena watched him from the kitchen window as he shoveled the front walk, his breath misting in the cold air. Margaret came to stand beside her, following her gaze. "He is a good man," Margaret said quietly, "takes after his father in that way." Helena felt her cheeks warm. "I was just watching the snow melt." "Of course you were." Margaret's tone was gently amused. "Helena, I know we have not known each other long, but I want you to understand something. You are welcome here for as long as you want to stay. If you want to come to Seligman with us, you can. If you would rather stay here in Flagstaff and help me with the boarding house, that would be wonderful too. And if you decide you want to go somewhere else entirely and make your own way, I will help you do that. You have choices now. You are not trapped." Helena felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "I also want you to know," Margaret continued carefully, "that Knox is his own man. He makes his own decisions about his life, and I do not interfere. But I will say this. I have not seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you in a very long time. Maybe ever." Helena's heart began to beat faster. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes that does not matter as much as you think it should," Margaret said. "When I met Knox's father, I knew within a week that I would marry him. We were married 3 months later and had 24 happy years together before he died. When it is right, you know." Helena did not trust herself to respond. She simply nodded and went back to kneading the bread dough she had been working on, her mind spinning with possibilities she barely dared to consider. 2 days later, they set out for Seligman. The roads had dried enough to be passable, though still muddy in places. Knox drove the wagon, with Margaret and Helena bundled in the back among supplies and luggage. The journey would take 3 days, with stops at ranches along the way where Margaret had friends who would put them up for the night. The landscape changed as they traveled south and west, the pine forests giving way to high desert country with sweeping vistas and red rock formations. Helena had never seen anything like it. The sky seemed impossibly vast, and the air was so clear she felt like she could see for 100 miles. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she felt a strange sense of freedom. The past was behind her, and the future was an open road stretching toward an unknown horizon. They stopped the first night at a cattle ranch owned by a weathered couple named Harold and Susan Mitchell. The Mitchells welcomed them warmly, insisting on feeding them a huge meal of beef stew and fresh biscuits. Over dinner, Harold told stories about the early days of ranching in the territory, when Apache raids were still a real threat, and every day was a gamble. "Things have settled down now," Harold said, refilling Knox's coffee cup. "Geronimo surrendered back in '81, and most of the Apache have been moved to the reservations. Still get the occasional rustler or outlaw passing through, but nothing like the old days." "How is the situation around Seligman?" Knox asked. "Quiet as a church," Harold replied. "Railroads brought in more people, more civilization. Hell, they even got a proper schoolhouse now and a church. Town's growing." That night, Helena lay in the small guest room the Mitchells had given her and thought about what kind of life might be waiting for her in Seligman. She could be a teacher, perhaps, if the school needed one. Or she could help Margaret manage the ranch. Or she could find some other path entirely. The possibilities felt both exhilarating and overwhelming. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Helena, you awake? It was Knox's voice, low and quiet. Helena sat up and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before cracking the door open. Knox stood in the hallway, still fully dressed. Is something wrong? She whispered. No, I just wanted to check on you, make sure you are all right. I know this is a lot, all this traveling and uncertainty. Helena felt warmth spread through her chest. I am all right. Better than all right, actually. I feel like I am finally moving towards something instead of just existing. Knox nodded slowly. Good. That is good. He hesitated, then said, Helena, I know this might not be the right time, but I need to say something. These past few days, getting to know you, seeing how you handle yourself, I think you are remarkable. I know your father did a terrible thing, leaving you the way he did, but I am glad you came into our lives, into my life. Helena's breath caught. Knox, You do not have to say anything, Knox said quickly. I just wanted you to know. Whatever you decide about your future, wherever you end up, I will help you get there. But I am hoping maybe you will decide to stay. In Seligman, I mean, with us. I think I might, Helena whispered. I think I really might. Knox's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his usually serious expression into something warm and open. Good. That is real good. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. Sleep well, Helena. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her standing in the doorway with her heart racing and her hand tingling where he had touched it. The remaining 2 days of travel passed in a pleasant blur. The weather held clear and cool, perfect for traveling. Margaret told Helena stories about her friendship with Elizabeth, painting a picture of Helena's mother as a young woman that Helena had never known. Knox pointed out landmarks and wildlife, teaching her about the country they were passing through. Helena found herself relaxing more than she could remember relaxing in years, laughing at Knox's dry observations and Margaret's warm-hearted teasing. They reached Seligman late in the afternoon of the 3rd day. The town was larger than Helena had expected, sprawling along both sides of the railroad tracks with a main street lined with shops and businesses. She could see the schoolhouse Harold had mentioned, a neat white building with a bell tower, and beside it a church with a simple wooden cross. Beyond the town, the desert stretched away in all directions, dotted with scrub brush and rock formations that glowed pink and gold in the late afternoon sun. Margaret's ranch was about 3 miles outside town, set in a small valley with a creek running through it. The main house was built of adobe and wood, low and sturdy, with a wide porch and a red tile roof. There were several outbuildings, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, and a chicken coop. The whole place had an air of solid prosperity and good management. A man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, a wiry fellow in his 40s with sun-weathered skin and a ready smile. Mrs. Garrett, Knox, about time you showed up. Was starting to think you decided to spend the whole winter up in Flagstaff. Good to see you too, Cyrus, Knox said, jumping down from the wagon. How have things been? Quiet. Cattle are all accounted for, no problems with predators or rustlers. Water's been good. Cyrus's eyes slid to Helena with open curiosity. Who is this? This is Helena Nichols, Margaret said, allowing Knox to help her down from the wagon. She is Elizabeth Keating's daughter. You remember me talking about Elizabeth? Cyrus's eyebrows rose. Your friend from back east. Well, I will be. Welcome, miss. Any friend of Mrs. Garrett's is welcome here. Helena soon learned that Cyrus had worked for Margaret's husband for 15 years, and had stayed on after his death to help Margaret and Knox manage the ranch. He lived in the bunkhouse with 2 younger hands, Miguel and Tom, who had been out checking on the cattle when they arrived. The house was warm and comfortable inside, furnished simply but with care. Margaret showed Helena to a bedroom that overlooked the creek, with a window seat and soft blue curtains that moved in the breeze. This was going to be a guest room, but it is yours now for as long as you want it. That evening, they had supper with Cyrus and the other ranch hands at the big table in the kitchen. The men were polite and welcoming, though Helena caught them stealing glances at her when they thought she was not looking. She supposed a young single woman was an oddity on a ranch like this. After supper, Knox offered to show Helena around the property before the light failed completely. They walked down to the creek, where cottonwood trees grew along the banks and the water burbled over smooth stones. The air was cooling rapidly as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "It is beautiful here," Helena said, breathing in the clean desert air. "So different from Santa Fe, but beautiful in its own way." "It gets in your blood," Knox agreed. "The space, the quiet. I have been to some cities back east, and I could not stand the crowds, the noise. This feels like home." Helena turned to look at him, finding him already watching her. "Knox, can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you really help me that day at the depot? And please do not say it is just because it was the right thing to do. There is more to it than that, is not there?" Knox was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the darkening sky. "My father left us once," he finally said. "I was about 12. He had some kind of breakdown, I guess you would call it. Just walked out one day and did not come back for 6 months. My mother held everything together, but I remember what it felt like, being abandoned like that, not knowing if he was coming back, if he even cared. He did come back eventually, and he was a good man after that. But I never forgot that feeling. When I saw you standing there at that depot, alone and trying so hard to be brave, it all came back. I could not leave you there. I could not be the person who walked away." Helena felt tears prick her eyes. "I am sorry that happened to you. It made me who I am," Knox said simply. "And right now, I am pretty glad about who I am because it led me to you." Helena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Knox, I have to tell you something too. I have never felt this way before. I know we have barely known each other a week, but when I am with you, I feel safe and seen and like myself in a way I never did before. I do not know if that makes any sense." "It makes perfect sense," Knox said, his voice rough. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Helena, I am falling in love with you. I know it is fast, I know it is crazy, but it is the truth." "It is not crazy," Helena whispered. "Because I am falling in love with you too." Knox made a sound that was half laugh, half sigh of relief, and then he was kissing her. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Helena felt like every nerve in her body had suddenly come alive. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and joy into that single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Knox rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, give you time to be sure. But Helena, if you will have me, I want to marry you. I want you to stay here, build a life with me. I know I am asking a lot, and if you need time, I understand." Helena laughed, feeling giddy and reckless and more alive than she had ever felt. "I do not need time. I know what I want. I want you, Knox Garrett. I want this life, this place. I want all of it." Knox swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Helena felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She was not the abandoned daughter anymore. She was Helena Nichols, soon to be Helena Garrett, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Margaret took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. "I suppose I should start planning a wedding," she said. "Nothing fancy," Helena said quickly. "Just family and friends, simple and real. That sounds perfect, Margaret agreed, pulling Helena into a warm hug. Elizabeth would be so happy for you, sweetheart. I know she would. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and joy. Knox and Helena spent every possible moment together, riding out to check on the cattle, working side by side in the barn, sitting up late by the fire talking about everything and nothing. Margaret proved to be a patient and loving mentor, teaching Helena the intricacies of ranch management and sharing her wisdom about building a life in the harsh but beautiful desert country. Helena also got to know Cyrus, Miguel, and Tom better. Cyrus turned out to have a gift for storytelling, entertaining them over dinner with tales of his adventures working cattle drives in Texas before coming to Arizona. Miguel was quiet but kind, with a dry sense of humor that emerged when you least expected it. Tom was the youngest at 19, eager and hardworking, always ready to learn. The town of Seligman welcomed Helena warmly once word spread that she was Margaret Garrett's goddaughter and engaged to Knox. The school teacher, a cheerful young woman named Clara, immediately befriended her and invited her to join the ladies' auxiliary at the church. The owner of the general store, Mr. Hartley, offered her credit based on the Garrett name alone. Even the town marshal, a gruff man named Donovan, tipped his hat to her respectfully when they passed on the street. Helena felt herself blooming in this new life. She had always been quiet and reserved, trained by her father to be seen and not heard. But here, people asked for her opinions and listened when she spoke. Margaret relied on her help with the ranch accounts and sought her advice on business decisions. Knox treated her as an equal partner, discussing plans for the ranch's future and asking what she thought they should do. One evening about a month after their arrival in Seligman, Knox took Helena on a ride up into the hills that overlooked the ranch. They dismounted at the top of a ridge where the view stretched for miles in every direction, the desert painted in shades of amber and rose by the setting sun. "I used to come up here when I was younger," Knox said, standing close behind Helena with his arms wrapped around her waist. "Whenever I needed to think or just get away from everything. It is always beautiful up here, but it is even more beautiful with you." Helena leaned back against his chest, savoring his warmth and strength. "I love it here. I love this whole place. Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I was that day at the depot." "We both got lucky," Knox murmured against her hair. "Helena, I have been thinking, I do not want to wait. I know it has not been the traditional courtship period, but I do not care about tradition. I love you, you love me, and we both know this is right. Will you marry me? Soon? Next month maybe, before winter really sets in." Helena turned in his arms, her heart full to bursting. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Knox produced a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "My father gave it to my mother when they got engaged, and she gave it to me last week. She said it should go to you." Helena held out her hand, and Knox slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the turquoise catching the last rays of sunlight and glowing like captured sky. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the love and passion she had been holding back, and Knox responded with equal fervor, his hands tangling in her hair as he pulled her closer. They made love there on the hilltop as the stars came out, gentle and tender and full of wonder. It was Helena's first time, and Knox was patient and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay wrapped in his coat looking up at the vast canopy of stars, and Helena thought she had never been so happy. "I wish we could stay here forever," she whispered. "We will come back," Knox promised. "This can be our place. Whenever we need to remember this moment, we will come back here." They rode down as the moon rose, arriving back at the ranch well after dark. If Margaret suspected what had happened, she said nothing, only smiled and hugged them both good night. The wedding was held on a crisp November afternoon at the church in Seligman. Margaret had insisted on making Helena a dress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Knox wore a new suit, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished to a shine. The church was packed with townspeople and ranchers from all over the area, all eager to celebrate with the Garretts. Clara played the piano as Helena walked down the aisle, her heart racing with joy and anticipation. Knox stood at the altar watching her approach, and the love in his eyes was so clear and strong that Helena felt tears spill down her cheeks. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Knox kissed her with such tenderness that the whole congregation sighed. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the trees. There was dancing and music, food and laughter, toasts and good wishes. Cyrus gave a rambling, affectionate speech about how Knox had grown from a scrawny kid into a fine man, and how lucky they all were that Helena had come into their lives. Margaret cried happy tears and told stories about Elizabeth, making sure everyone knew that Helena's mother was there in spirit. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift home, Knox pulled Helena aside. "Ready to see your wedding present? You got me a present." "Knox, you already gave me this ring. This is different. Come on." He led her to the barn where Cyrus was waiting with a huge grin. Inside one of the stalls stood the most beautiful horse Helena had ever seen, a young mare with a glossy chestnut coat and intelligent dark eyes. "She is yours," Knox said, his arm around Helena's shoulders. "Cyrus has been working with her, and she is gentle as a lamb. I thought you might want your own horse so you can ride with me whenever you want." Helena was crying again, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "She is perfect." "What should I name her? That is up to you." Helena studied the mare, who nickered softly and pushed her nose into Helena's hand. "Liberty," she decided, "because that is what you gave me, freedom and a new life." "Liberty it is," Knox said, kissing the top of her head. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Knox and Helena came together as husband and wife. There was no nervousness this time, only love and desire and the deep certainty that they belonged to each other completely. Knox was tender and passionate, showing Helena pleasures she had never imagined, and she gave herself to him with complete trust and abandon. Afterward, lying in the tangle of sheets with her head on Knox's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow and steady beneath her ear, Helena thought about the journey that had brought her here. Her father's abandonment had seemed like the worst thing that could happen. But it had led her to Knox, to Margaret, to this life that felt more real and true than anything she had known before. "What are you thinking about?" Knox murmured, his hand stroking lazy circles on her back. "How strange life is," Helena said. "How the worst moments can turn into the best ones. How being left alone at that depot was actually the beginning of everything." "You were never really alone," Knox said. "Even before I found you, even in that moment, you were heading toward me, toward this. We were always going to find each other." "You really believe that?" "I do. Some things are meant to be. You and me, we are meant to be." Helena pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I love you, Knox Garrett. I love you too, Helena Garrett, and I always will." Winter settled over the Arizona territory, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. Helena threw herself into ranch life, learning everything she could about cattle and horses, water rights and grazing land. She discovered she had a talent for breeding stock, an eye for which animals would produce the best offspring. Knox was delighted, and together they began planning to expand the ranch's herd. Margaret announced at Christmas that she was thinking of staying in Seligman year-round and selling the boarding house in Flagstaff. "I'm getting too old to manage two properties," she said. "And besides, I want to be here to help when the grandchildren start coming." Helena blushed, but she and Knox exchanged a meaningful look. They had been married for 2 months, and Helena had begun to suspect she might already be pregnant. Her monthly courses were late, and she had been feeling queasy in the mornings. She had not said anything to Knox yet, wanting to be sure, but the possibility filled her with joy and anticipation. A week later, she rode into town to visit the doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Patterson, who had been practicing medicine in Seligman for 20 years. He confirmed what she had suspected. She was indeed with child, probably due sometime in early August. Helena practically flew home on Liberty, her heart singing with the news. She found Knox in the barn repairing a saddle and dragged him outside for privacy. "I have something to tell you," she said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Knox looked alarmed. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. Knox, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Knox just stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then a huge grin spread across his face and he let out a whoop of joy, sweeping her up and spinning her around just like he had that first night by the creek. "A baby. We are having a baby." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "Are you all right? Should you be riding? Should you be doing all the work you have been doing?" Helena laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I am fine, doctor. Patterson said I am healthy and strong, and there is no reason I cannot continue with normal activities for several more months. I am not fragile, Knox. I know, I just want to take care of you. You do take care of me, every day." Helena took his hands in hers. "Are you happy about this?" "Happy? Helena, I am over the moon. I cannot wait to meet our baby, to see you holding our child, to build our family together." They told Margaret that night over supper, and she cried and laughed and hugged them both fiercely. "Elizabeth would be so proud," she said. "So proud of the woman you have become, Helena, and the family you are creating." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Helena felt wonderful most of the time, energized and glowing with health. Knox was attentive without being smothering, and Margaret was a constant source of wisdom and reassurance. Cyrus and the ranch hands went out of their way to make things easier for her, taking on tasks she normally would have done and generally treating her like she was made of glass, which Helena found both annoying and endearing. In late March, Knox came home from town with news that made Helena's blood run cold. "There has been a robbery over in Flagstaff," he said. "3 men held up the Wells Fargo office and killed the clerk. The marshal there says one of the descriptions matches your father." Helena sat down heavily, her hand going to her swollen belly. "My father? They are not sure," Knox said quickly. "It might not be him, but I thought you should know in case he shows up here looking for you, or for money." "He left me at a train depot because of gambling debts," Helena said bitterly. "I suppose it is not a far jump from that to robbery." "I am not going to let anything happen to you," Knox said firmly. "He will not get near you or our baby." Helena wanted to believe that her father would not come to Seligman, that he had forgotten all about her. But a week later, a stranger rode up to the ranch asking for Helena Nichols. Cyrus sent him away and came to get Knox immediately. "Man says he has a message from Joseph Nichols," Cyrus reported. "Says it is urgent." Knox's jaw tightened. "Where is Helena?" "In the house with your mother. Keep her there. I will deal with this." Helena watched from the window as Knox walked out to meet the stranger, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. The 2 men talked for several minutes, their voices too low to hear, and then the stranger rode away. Knox stood watching him go, his posture tense, before turning back to the house. What did he want? Helena asked as soon as Knox came through the door. Knox's expression was grim. Your father is in trouble. He says he needs money and he is asking you to help him. He is hiding out about 20 miles from here, afraid to come into town because the law is looking for him. Helena felt sick. He wants me to give him money after what he did. That is what the man said. He is supposed to come back tomorrow for an answer. What should I do? Helena looked between Knox and Margaret, feeling lost. You do not owe that man anything, Margaret said firmly. He abandoned you. He does not deserve your help. But he is still my father, Helena said softly. And if he is in trouble, if he might die because I refuse to help, I do not know if I could live with that. Knox came to her and took her hands. Helena, if we give him money, we will be helping a wanted criminal. That makes us accomplices. We could lose everything, the ranch, our freedom. Is he worth that risk? Helena looked down at their joined hands, feeling torn. She hated her father for what he had done to her, but he was still her blood, still the man who had raised her for 21 years. Could she really turn her back on him completely? I need to see him, she said finally. I need to look him in the eye and hear him say what he did, why he did it. Then I will decide. Knox looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. All right, but I am coming with you, and we are taking Cyrus and Tom as well. I am not taking any chances. The next day they rode out to the location the messenger had given them, a ramshackle-lined shack in the foothills. Joseph Nichols was there, and Helena barely recognized him. He had lost weight, his face was haggard and unshaven, and his clothes were dirty and torn. He looked like a man at the end of his rope. Helena, he said, his voice cracking, thank God you came. Helena dismounted slowly, her hand on Knox's arm for support. Why are you here? What do you want? I need help. I need money to get out of the territory. The law thinks I was part of that robbery in Flagstaff, but I was not. I was in the area, but I did not rob anyone or kill anyone. You have to believe me. Why should I believe anything you say? Helena asked coldly. You left me at a train depot in a snowstorm. You abandoned me. Joseph flinched. I know I did wrong by you, but I was desperate, Helena. The gambling debts, the men who were after me, I did not know what else to do. You could have been honest with me. You could have let me help you instead of treating me like a burden you needed to get rid of. You are right. You are absolutely right. Joseph took a step toward her, and Knox immediately moved to block him. Joseph raised his hands. I am not going to hurt her. She is my daughter. A daughter you threw away, Knox said, his voice hard as iron. You gave up the right to call her that when you left her alone and afraid. Joseph's eyes filled with tears. I know, but I am still her father. And I am begging you, Helena, please. I need help. Just enough money to get to California. I will disappear, and you will never have to see me again. Helena looked at this broken man who was her father and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Pity, anger, sorrow, and underneath it all, a lingering trace of the love she had once felt for him. But she also felt the weight of the new life she had built, the family she had created with Knox. She could not risk losing all of that for a man who had proven he could not be trusted. No, she said quietly, I will not give you money. But I will do this. I will go to the marshal in Seligman and tell him you want to turn yourself in. If you are truly innocent of that robbery, then the law will sort it out, but I will not help you run. Joseph's face crumpled. They will hang me. Even if I did not do it, they will hang me because I cannot prove where I was. Then maybe you should have lived a different kind of life, Helena said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice was. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. I am sorry things turned out this way, but I cannot help you. I have a husband and a baby coming, and they are my family now. You stopped being my family the day you drove away from that depot. She turned and walked back to her horse, Knox right beside her. Behind them, Joseph called out, "Helena, please, do not do this." But Helena did not look back. She mounted Liberty and rode away, and she did not shed a single tear until they were miles from the line shack. Then she finally let herself cry, mourning the father she had once had and the father he had failed to be. Knox held her that night as she wept, offering comfort without words, and when the tears finally stopped, Helena felt lighter somehow, as if she had been carrying a heavy weight for years and had finally set it down. "You did the right thing," Knox said softly. "I know it hurts, but you did the right thing." "I know," Helena whispered. "I just wish it did not have to be this way." Joseph Nichols was arrested 3 days later, turned in by the messenger who had been helping him when the reward money became too tempting to resist. He stood trial for the robbery and murder in Flagstaff, and was convicted based on circumstantial evidence and his known desperation for money. He was sentenced to hang, and Helena received word of his execution in late May. She grieved for the father he could have been, the father she had needed him to be, but she did not let the grief consume her. She had too much to live for, too much happiness waiting for her. Knox and Margaret helped her through the dark days, and slowly the sadness faded, replaced by anticipation for the new life she was carrying. Their son was born on a hot August afternoon, arriving quickly and with relatively little trouble. Helena labored through the morning with Margaret and the midwife in attendance, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she was holding a red-faced, squalling baby boy in her arms. Knox was there moments later, having been banished to the barn during the birth. He looked at his son with such wonder and love that Helena felt her heart might burst. "He is perfect," Knox said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect, both of you." They named him Matthew after Knox's father, and he was indeed perfect. He had Knox's gray eyes and Helena's dark hair, and from the very beginning, he was strong and healthy. Margaret declared him the most beautiful baby she had ever seen, and Cyrus whittled him a set of toy horses that sat on the shelf in the nursery waiting for Matthew to grow old enough to play with them. Helena had never known she could love someone so much so quickly. Motherhood transformed her, giving her a fierce protectiveness and a deep sense of purpose. She and Knox took turns walking Matthew when he cried at night, and they spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at the miracle they had created together. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Knox's skill with cattle and horses, combined with Helena's head for business, made them one of the most successful operations in the territory. They bought more land, expanded the herd, and hired additional hands. The ranch house was expanded too, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family. Matthew was joined by a sister when he was 2.5. Sarah was born on a spring morning when the desert was covered in wildflowers, and she had her mother's smile and her father's determination. Matthew was initially skeptical of this tiny creature who cried a lot and could not play with his toy horses, but he quickly became her devoted protector. 2 years after Sarah came another son, Jacob, who was quiet and thoughtful from birth. And 2 years after that, twin girls, Emma and Grace, who filled the house with chaos and laughter. Knox and Helena found themselves at the center of a boisterous, loving family, and they were happier than they had ever dreamed possible. Margaret was a doting grandmother, spoiling the children shamelessly and teaching them all the things Knox and Helena were too busy to teach. She told them stories of their great-grandmother Elizabeth, making sure they knew about the woman who had been such an important part of Helena's life, even though they never met. The children grew up strong and healthy, shaped by the hard work and beauty of ranch life. Matthew became his father's shadow, learning everything Knox could teach him about ranching. Sarah discovered a love of horses that rivaled her mother's and spent every free moment in the barn. Jacob was the quiet one, more interested in books than cattle, and Helena encouraged his scholarly bent, already imagining him as a lawyer or doctor. The twins were still too young to show their true personalities, but they were fearless and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Knox took Helena back up to the hilltop where they had first made love. The children were safely at home with Margaret, and Knox had packed a picnic supper and a bottle of wine. They sat on a blanket watching the sunset, the same spectacular display of colors they had seen that first night. 10 years, Helena marveled. It seems like yesterday and forever at the same time. You ever regret it? Knox asked. Staying here, marrying me, building this life. Helena turned to look at him, this man who had become her whole world. His face was more weathered now, with lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting in the sun, and there was gray threading through his dark hair. But he was still the same Knox who had offered her shelter in a snowstorm, still the man who had promised she would never be alone again. Not for one single second, she said firmly. You gave me everything, Knox, a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me the same, Knox said, pulling her close. Before you, I was just going through the motions. You made everything mean something. You made me complete. They made love there on the hilltop, slower and more tender than that first time, with the deep familiarity of 10 years of marriage. Afterward, lying in Knox's arms looking up at the stars, Helena thought about the girl she had been, standing alone at that snowy depot. That girl had been terrified and lost, convinced her life was over, but her life had just been beginning. The best parts of her were still waiting to be discovered, still waiting for the right person to see them and draw them out. Knox had been that person. He had taken a frightened, abandoned woman and shown her she was strong and capable and worthy of love. He had given her a home and a family and a future. And in return, Helena had given him her heart completely, building a life with him that was richer and more fulfilling than either of them could have imagined. What are you thinking about? Knox asked, echoing the words he had spoken on their wedding night. How grateful I am, Helena said. For that snowstorm, for that depot, for you finding me, for every moment that led us to this. Best storm that ever happened, Knox agreed. Changed both our lives. They stayed on the hilltop until the stars were bright and the moon had risen, talking about their children and their plans for the ranch and the future they were still building together. When they finally rode back down to the house, the windows were glowing with lamplight, and they could hear the sounds of their children getting ready for bed. This was home. This was family. This was the life Helena had never known she wanted until Knox showed it to her. And as she walked into the house with her husband's arm around her waist, surrounded by the noise and warmth and love of her family, Helena knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. The children grew and changed, each developing their own strong personalities and dreams. Matthew, true to his early promise, became Knox's right hand on the ranch, a skilled cowboy and natural leader. At 18, he was already being courted by several local families with marriageable daughters, but he showed no interest in settling down yet, too focused on learning everything he could about running the operation. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to become a veterinarian. It was an unusual ambition for a young woman in 1901, but Knox and Helena supported her dream, arranging for her to apprentice with the veterinarian in Flagstaff. She came home on holidays bursting with new knowledge and excitement, regaling them with stories of complicated surgeries and difficult births. Jacob fulfilled Helena's prediction by becoming a scholar. He won a place at a university back east, studying law with the intention of returning to Arizona to practice. His letters home were full of wonder at the big city and the intellectual stimulation, but he always ended by saying how much he missed the ranch and the wide open spaces. The twins, now 12 years old, were as different as two people could be despite being identical in appearance. Emma was bold and outgoing, always the first to try something new, while Grace was quieter and more thoughtful, preferring to watch and plan before acting. Together they were a formidable team, and Helena often said they would either rule the world someday or drive everyone around them crazy trying. Margaret had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 years earlier at the age of 73. Her loss had been deeply felt by the whole family, but especially by Helena, who owed so much to the woman who had taken her in without hesitation. They buried Margaret on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Beloved Mother and Grandmother." She opened her home and heart to all who needed it. Knox and Helena were now in their early 40s, and while the years had brought some aches and pains, they were still healthy and vital. The ranch had grown to be one of the largest and most successful in the territory, employing over 20 hands and running several thousand head of cattle. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, economic downturns and changes in the market, always adapting and finding ways to thrive. One evening in early spring, Knox and Helena sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they tried to observe as often as their busy lives allowed. Knox was reading the newspaper from Phoenix, and Helena was mending one of Jacob's old shirts that Emma had appropriated for barn work. "Says here Arizona might become a state soon," Knox commented. "They have been talking about it in Congress again." Helena smiled. "We will finally be official. Arizona State instead of Arizona Territory. That will be something." "Hard to believe how much has changed since you got here," Knox said, setting down the paper. "The territory has grown so much. More people, more towns, more civilization." "Some things have not changed, though," Helena said, reaching over to take his hand. "The important things." Knox squeezed her fingers gently. "No, those things are eternal. You and me, our family, this land. Those are forever." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear the lowing of cattle and the voices of the ranch hands as they finished the day's work. From inside the house came the sounds of Emma and Grace arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to set the table. "You ever think about that day at the depot?" Helena asked suddenly. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come in when you did?" Knox turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "All the time. But I believe we were meant to find each other, Helena. If it had not been that day in that depot, it would have been somewhere else, some other time. You were mine and I was yours from the very beginning." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from being overwhelmed by love and gratitude. "You saved me that day. You know that, do not you? I was so lost, so scared, and you saved me." "We saved each other," Knox corrected gently. "You gave my life meaning and purpose. Before you, I was just existing. After you, I was living." Emma appeared at the door, her face flushed from running. "Mama, Papa, one of the mares is foaling. Tom says it is happening now." Knox and Helena exchanged a glance and smiled. Some things never changed. They had witnessed dozens of foalings over the years, but each one was still exciting, still miraculous. They walked to the barn together, their hands still linked, with Emma running ahead to spread the news. In the barn, a circle of people had gathered around the stall where a bay mare was indeed in labor. Tom was there with his careful, gentle hands, ready to help if needed. Grace was watching intently, her face serious with concentration. Several of the ranch hands had stopped by to witness the event, because even the most hardened cowboy could not resist the miracle of new life. The foal was born quickly, sliding into the world with a rush of fluid and a chorus of encouraging voices. It was a colt, long-legged and awkward, with a white star on his forehead. The mare immediately began cleaning him, and within 20 minutes he was struggling to his feet, wobbling but determined. Helena felt Knox's arm come around her shoulders as they watched the colt take his first unsteady steps. This was life, she thought. This constant cycle of birth and growth, change and renewal. This was what they had built together, a place where life could flourish and thrive. "He is beautiful," Emma breathed. "Can I name him, Papa?" "What would you name him?" Knox asked. Emma thought for a moment. "Hope. Because he is new and perfect and full of promise." Knox looked at Helena and she nodded. "Hope it is," he said. "That is a fine name, Emma." That night, after the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Knox and Helena made love with the slow, deep passion of long familiarity. They knew each other's bodies as well as they knew their own, knew exactly how to give and receive pleasure, how to communicate without words. Afterward, Helena lay with her head on Knox's chest, listening to his heartbeat and feeling utterly content. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you so much it still surprises me sometimes." "I love you too," Knox murmured, his hand stroking her hair. "Every day more than the day before. That is my promise to you, Helena. Every day more than the day before." Time continued its steady march. Jacob graduated from law school and returned to Arizona, setting up practice in Flagstaff, and quickly making a name for himself as a skilled and honest lawyer. He married a teacher named Anne, a quiet woman with a quick mind and gentle heart, and they had 2 children in quick succession. Sarah completed her veterinary training against all odds and social expectations, becoming the first female veterinarian in northern Arizona. She chose not to marry, declaring that her career and her animals were family enough for her. Helena worried sometimes that Sarah was lonely, but Sarah insisted she was happy, and Helena learned to accept her daughter's choices even when they were not what she would have chosen for herself. Matthew finally settled down at 25, marrying a rancher's daughter named Catherine, who was as skilled with horses and cattle as he was. They built a house on the northern section of the Garrett Ranch and started a family of their own, giving Knox and Helena their first grandchildren from Matthew's line. Emma shocked everyone by running off at 19 with a traveling photographer, sending a cheerful letter from San Francisco saying she was seeing the world and not to worry. Helena worried anyway, but Knox reminded her that Emma had always been a free spirit and she needed to find her own path. Emma did eventually return, 3 years later, with a portfolio of stunning photographs and stories that kept the whole family entertained for months. She opened a photography studio in Seligman and became quite successful, though she never married. Grace took a different path, marrying young to a schoolteacher and settling into quiet domesticity in town. She had 4 children in 6 years and seemed perfectly content with her role as wife and mother, though Helena sometimes saw flashes of the adventurous girl Grace had been and wondered if she ever regretted choosing such a conventional life. Through it all, Knox and Helena remained the steady center of the family. The ranch continued to prosper under their management, adapting to changing times and new technologies. They saw Arizona become a state in 1912, exactly as Knox had predicted, and they celebrated with the rest of the territory at the achievement. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies becoming less flexible and more prone to aches. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. They still rode up to their hilltops several times a year, still watched the sunset together from the porch, still made love with passion and tenderness. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration. There were over 40 people present, representing 3 generations of the family Knox and Helena had created. Looking around at all those faces, Helena was overwhelmed by gratitude and wonder. "Quite a legacy," Cyrus said, coming to stand beside her. He was an old man now, stooped and gray, but still sharp-minded and active. "You and Knox, you built something special here. We were lucky," Helena said. "So very lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Cyrus disagreed. "It was love and hard work and determination. That is what built this." He gestured at the gathering, the ranch, the life they had created. "That is all you two." Knox appeared at Helena's other side, slipping his arm around her waist in the familiar, comfortable gesture that still made her heart skip. "What are you two talking about? How lucky we are," Helena said, leaning into him. "The luckiest," Knox agreed. He looked out at their assembled family, and his face softened with love and pride. "Did you ever imagine that day at the depot that this was waiting for us?" Helena thought back to that frightened, abandoned girl standing in the snow, convinced her life was over. "Never. I could not have imagined anything this wonderful." "I told you that you would never be alone again," Knox said softly. "I kept that promise, did not I?" "You did," Helena said, tears streaming down her face. "You kept every promise you ever made to me, Knox Garrett, every single one." They stood there together, surrounded by the family they had built, the legacy they had created, and Helena knew that her story had turned out exactly as it was meant to. She had been abandoned and lost, but she had found her way to the one person who could make her whole. She had been afraid and alone, but she had discovered a courage and strength she never knew she possessed. And most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the worst moments of your life are actually doorways to the best ones, that being left behind can lead to being found. That love, when it is real and true, can transform everything. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Knox pulled Helena close and kissed her softly. Around them, their children and grandchildren laughed and talked and celebrated, the sound of family and love and belonging. Helena closed her eyes and savored the moment, imprinting it in her memory alongside all the other precious moments of her life. The day Knox had found her at the depot. Their first kiss by the creek. Their wedding. The births of their children. Every sunrise and sunset they had shared, every challenge they had faced together, every joy they had celebrated. This was her life. This was her family. This was her happily ever after. And it was more than she had ever dared to dream. Years later, when Knox and Helena were both in their 70s, they still lived on the ranch, though Matthew and Catherine had taken over most of the daily management. Their children were grown with families of their own, and their grandchildren were having children, creating a 4th generation of Garretts. Knox's health began to fail when he was 76, his heart growing weaker despite the doctor's best efforts. Helena refused to leave his side, sleeping in a chair next to their bed so she would be there if he needed anything. The children came to visit often, bringing the grandchildren and great-grandchildren to say goodbye to the patriarch of the family. On a warm spring evening with the windows open and the smell of desert flowers drifting in on the breeze, Knox squeezed Helena's hand and said, "I am not afraid." "Neither am I," Helena said, though tears were streaming down her face. "We had a good life, Knox, the best life. No regrets." he asked, his voice weak but his eyes still sharp. Not a single one. Would you do it all again? In a heartbeat. Knox smiled, and for a moment Helena could see the young man he had been, standing in that depot doorway offering help to a stranger. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Helena Garrett. Loving you was the greatest adventure of my life. I love you, Helena whispered. I will always love you. I know, Knox said, and I will be waiting for you wherever I am going, so you are never alone again. He died peacefully just after midnight, with Helena holding his hand, and their children gathered around the bed. Helena felt his spirit leave, felt the exact moment when he slipped away, and she pressed a final kiss to his weathered hand. The grief was profound, a physical pain that took her breath away. But underneath the grief was gratitude. Gratitude for 52 years of marriage, for 5 children and dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, for a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. Helena lived another 5 years after Knox died, remaining active and engaged despite her grief. She spent her time with her family, passing down stories and wisdom to the younger generations. She made sure they knew the story of how she and Knox had met, how he had found her at that depot and promised she would never be alone again. She wanted them to understand that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that hope could emerge from despair, that courage was sometimes just about taking the next step forward. On a crisp autumn morning, just after her 82nd birthday, Helena sat down in her favorite chair on the porch to watch the sunrise. The air was cool and sweet, and the desert was painted in soft shades of pink and gold. She closed her eyes, feeling tired in a way that went bone deep, and she knew her time was coming. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt Knox's presence, as real as if he were standing beside her. She could hear his voice, warm and loving, saying the words he had spoken so many years ago. You will never be alone again. And she was not. She was surrounded by love, by family, by the legacy she and Knox had built together. She had lived a life worth living, loved and been loved in return, and left the world better than she had found it. Helena Garrett died peacefully in her sleep that morning, a smile on her face and the sunrise painting the sky in glorious colors. Her family mourned her passing but celebrated her life, knowing she had lived every day to the fullest and had finally been reunited with the man she loved. They buried her next to Knox on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where they had first made love and later returned so many times to remember who they were and why they had chosen each other. The headstone was simple but perfect. Helena Garrett, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was never alone. The ranch continued under the management of the Garrett descendants, each generation adding their own stamp while honoring the foundation Knox and Helena had built. The story of how the ranch had started, with a cowboy finding an abandoned woman at a snowy depot and promising she would never be alone again, became family legend, passed down through the generations as a testament to the power of love and the importance of keeping your promises. And on warm spring evenings, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and the sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, the family would gather on the porch of the ranch house and tell stories about Knox and Helena, about their love that had withstood every test, their partnership that had built an empire, their legacy that would endure for generations to come. Because some love stories do not end. They just transform, becoming part of the fabric of a family, a place, a history. Knox and Helena's love was like that. It had started with a promise made in a snowstorm, and it had grown into something magnificent and enduring, touching countless lives and creating ripples that would spread far into the future. The ranch still stands today, run by the 6th generation of Garretts, still prosperous and still home to a family that understands the value of love, hard work, and keeping your promises. And if you visit on a clear evening and climb the hill where Knox and Helena are buried, you can look out over the desert they loved and almost hear the echo of Knox's voice on the wind. You will never be alone again. It was a promise he kept, not just for the span of their lives, but for all the years that followed. Because true love never dies. It just changes form, becoming memory and legacy and inspiration for all who come after. And that is the greatest gift anyone can leave behind.